Focus TV's funniest and most versatile speaker, Char Vance, once again spreads her extremely contagious enthusiasm for the Catholic faith before a live audience of over 1,500 people gathered together in Phoenix, Arizona, who learned that the 11th commandment is, "Thou shalt laugh." So if it's true that laughter is a good way to jog internally, then you're in for a real workout with this accidental apostle.
One of my favorite stories was there's a woman, and she was kind of poor, and she lived in like a little duplex, and she lived next door, in sharing the duplex was an atheist. And every morning this woman would run out on the porch no matter what the day looked like, and she'd run out there and she'd say, "I praise you, Jesus. I love you, Jesus. I know whatever you need today, whatever I need today, you're going to supply my needs. I just want to thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus." And it would drive that atheist nuts. He'd have to go out there and get to the paper, and she'd be out there just praising God. If it was raining, "Oh, Jesus, thank you for the rain. You're watering my flowers. We needed it so bad." Every day, and it would drive the atheist nuts. And one day she runs out there and she says, "Oh, Jesus, I know I can thank you in advance for all my needs, and I'm out of groceries, and I have nothing to eat. But I know you're going to provide for me. You are going to take care of me, so I'm thanking you in advance." And the next morning when she walks out, there's groceries all over the porch. She said, "Thank you, Jesus. I knew you were going to provide for me." And the atheist jumps out the shrubs. And he says, "Ha ha, I want to tell you, those didn't come from Jesus. Those didn't come from God. There is no God. I bought those groceries, and I put them on your porch." And she looked over at him, and she looked back up, and she said, "Thank you, Jesus. Not only did you give me my groceries, you had the devil pay for them." You know, what do you think about this? It's a weighty subject, huh? I want to tell you about this because, you know, you can never win. People come up to me now and say, "Are you all right? You're not sick, are you?" Let me tell you something. And don't worry about this. I'm going to tell you something. I hate exercise. You know that program, Jazzercise? Forget it. I mean, if God wanted me to touch my toes, he would have put them higher up, you know? But I'll tell you something I do believe in, laugh-ercise. That's what I want to make. I want to make one of those Richard Simmons tapes, like laugh-ercise, you know? Laugh-ercise is good for you, because when you laugh, you exercise the organs inside of you. It sure beats jogging. And they tell you when you laugh, it lowers your blood pressure, it strengthens your heart, it's good for your face, it's got all kind of physical great things that it does for you. And so I said, well, this is the way to go. And you know what else it does? It sends oxygen to your brain. I don't know about you, but look, I'm trying to ginkgo, binko, and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember. And then I can't remember to take it. So this sends oxygen to your brain, and it's supposed to help you out in many ways. And they said, this is the healthiest thing you can do, to laugh. And last night, when I was at the healing service and everything, and if you hear the things, you see, when you laugh, you actually dispel that fear, and you dispel that negative depression in you. And laughter comes in and fills you with this joy and gives you a better outlook, and you look at things differently. And you gotta laugh. You gotta laugh. I mean, it's not what we're laughing at the problem, but God does have a sense of humor. We're proof. The last time I was here, it was a hurricane. This morning, I'm getting dressed. CNN says the hurricane's going to New Orleans. I said, you know what? This is Groundhog Day. You ever saw the movie Groundhog Day? If But you know what? Last year my talk was blessed by stress. He's got a sense of humor. He's like, do it again, baby. Walk the talk. Walk the talk. I'm not worried about it at all. I just want to tell you why. Because I am with some of the greatest people. You people here at this Arizona Mirror Center are some of the finest, most wonderful people. Let me tell you what you are. You people are great. The committee is great. The board is great. The volunteers are great. And people say, oh, no, don't call me great. But let me tell you what great is. There's a difference in the 15 minutes of fame and people that want to be on Oprah, they want to be on these TV shows. Great is when you do something for God. When it's not for your glory, but it's for the greater glory of God. And I can tell you, these people, we were stranded here. We couldn't get back. They had turned all the interstates, and there was no planes flying into New Orleans. They had shut down the airport for a triage center. And we ended up having to stay here 3 days and trying to make it up to Pennsylvania, where I had inherited my grandmother's home. And then, if you remember, my mother was very ill. I had no contact with her because you have maybe we could text a few people and we were trying to email people, but that's the most horrible feeling, is that when you can't get back to a loved one, you don't know how they are. We had no idea what was going on, and this is when the Lord said, okay, you talked about your Noah months, now trust. This is where you're going to walk the talk. And you people of this wonderful Mirror Center, this Arizona Mirror Center, put us up here for 3 days, stayed with us, found us a way, got us away, and got us to where we could get back. And I went up to Pennsylvania. I left Janie up there. I drove 18 hours, not knowing if my mother was dead or alive or where was she, because there was no hospital. She had a tube in her back, very ill, was supposed to have a procedure. They wouldn't let her have it because there was no electricity, and they had to shut everything down or everybody would be on life support. And my cousins and some of my family got my mother to Baton Rouge Hospital. And you know, if you know the story of my conversion, my mother was Baptist, my father was Lutheran. At 12, they make me an Episcopalian. And then, after a wonderful trip to Medjugorje, where I received, most importantly, a spiritual healing, then a physical healing, and it's a documented physical healing, my mother then converts to Catholicism. And my mother ends up in the only Catholic hospital called Our Lady of the Lake. To this day, when you're there, they still say the Angelus, they still say the morning prayers, they say the ending prayers, and this is where Our Lady had placed my mother. And I always worried about it as I traveled and as my mother got old, that something would happen to her when I was away. And it worried that as Janie, who travels with me and who first took me to Medjugorje, she worried about that. And God, if you totally trust, God had handled it, that we were home for when Janie's mother, and I have to teach you something about this, when Janie's mother went home and when my mother went home. And I'm telling you this story because later on I'm going to tell you a little bit about my mom. And I loved my mom. I mean, my mother and I were like best friends. She was this little petite woman. At 76 years old, she was still going to the tanning booth. And I would tell her, I said, Mother, that's not good for your skin. And she'd say, well, what do you think I pay a dermatologist for? You know. And she loved diamonds, you know. She was a wonderful, wonderful Catholic. She attended church, and she was very, very gracious to all the different priests. She would invite them over, and if they were sick, she would take care of them. And she was this wonderful person like that, and she really embraced the Catholic faith once she joined the faith. And my mother, I'm thinking about all the times. I have to tell you one thing, that my mother, truly, I'm an only child. And I have to tell you something. My mother was the travel agent for guilt trips. And I would have to say to her, you know, like, Mom, what would you really want me to do? They asked me to go speak for Mother's Day at this conference, and it would be very hard. I'd leave my mother and go out and speak on Mother's Day, or I would go off, and I didn't spend some time with her on a weekend to go to these conferences. And she'd say, well, that's okay. No, that's better. You go for our mother. You go for our mother, this and that. And When I got to the hospital there were no hospitals in New Orleans. You couldn't get back to the city. It was closed down. There were absolutely no hospitals, so anybody who was sick you were waiting in line to get into the hospital. So it was a miracle that my mother was even in the hospital. I drove 18 hours not knowing whether she was dead or alive, made it to the hospital, there she was. And I got to spend the next month, about 45 days in that hospital because we couldn't go back to the home. We had no electricity or anything, and I spent this beautiful 45 days in that hospital with my mother, telling her all the things I would ever want to say to her, all the things that she needed to say to me, and it was a gift. It was such a grace that she gave me these times together. And those are some of the good things and some of the accidental apostle things that actually Katrina was. But getting back to what I want to say is, as I was with my mother, and I eventually was able to take my mother home, and the following December, the day before Thanksgiving, my mother was, and I've listened to this carefully, was called home. Now, I'm telling you why I'm very carefully saying this, because this is a message, and I was told last night to make sure that I give you this message. After that happened, I was speaking in Chicago to a very large group. And a lot of people knew, and they were all asking about Katrina and how horrible it was, and yes, we lost homes and all this and that, but compared to some other things that other people lost, I didn't even really want to talk about it. But people would come up and say, well, how did your mother make out? How was your mother? I know your mother was ill. And I had to say, and so the very first thing I caught myself saying, I said, well, I lost my mother. And they would say, oh, I'm sorry. And immediately I got this, like, sting. And then I said, well, she passed away. And I got this kind of sting. And later on, I went up and spoke. And afterwards, I had this overwhelming thing to get out of the auditorium and go off by myself. I didn't know where I was going. I started walking the grounds. And lo and behold, there's this way of the cross. Way back, I didn't even know where it was. And I just walked back there by myself. And I found the fourth station of the cross. And those of you who know some of my talks, and I want to thank you because I get to come back here every time. I'm sorry I missed you last year, but I talked to Judy back there, and they do have other talks. So of the other talks about my conversions, my healings, and other things, she was so kind to go ahead and put them on DVD and CDs that you can get them. So what happened was I walked back, and I'm sitting by this fourth station, and very clearly, not like I don't hear her voice, but intuitively I hear her. Now, I would want to hear my mother like, my darling daughter, I miss you so much. I'm with you every step of the way. Don't worry about me. And this is what I hear. I passed away. What does that mean? You lost me? I'm not lost. And it's just like she's scolding me again. And I said, oh, Mother, I'm so sorry. She goes, I'm home. I'm home. I said, oh, Mother, I'll never say it again. So please, as a message from the other side, they are not lost. They did not pass away. What does that mean? I passed away like a leaf that blew away? I'm home. She didn't give me anything else. One other time before, when she died in November like that, and this is the things that's so amazing to me. We are very good friends with the Benedictine abbot, and the abbot is a young abbot, and he was like the son my mother never had. And both of us, unexpectedly, our mothers were not ill. Now, Janie had lost her mother, and Janie's the one who travels with me, and she had lost her mother in January. And then it was January, and then we had August, and come find out, Abbot Justin's mother got sick too. And this is out of the blue. They just got sick. We didn't expect it. And it almost turned into a race of who's going to get to heaven first. And I said, I think my mother's going to win. And he said, no, I think my mother's going to win. And I said, well, no, my mother was sicker longer, and your mother. And anyway, his mother won. And she died. She died, and her funeral, she died 2 days before my mother. And at his mother's funeral, he raises the chalice and says, Mother, I can no longer pray. I know where you are, and I pray that God would take Donna. And at that moment, my mother died. So my mother passed away. My mother went home at that moment. So he came back and he said, I told you my mother was going to beat you. I said, yeah, I know, but I mean, she raised a priest and my mother raised a heathen, you know. But I can tell you it was a wonderful gift. We couldn't go to work. We were locked up in there. And to spend that time and to have that grace, to be with that. And I remember being so tore up that I said, I won't be able to speak. I was an only child. I just didn't think I could speak at my own mother's funeral. And I was in that morning getting dressed, and I'm brushing my teeth, and I hear from her again. And she doesn't say, I know your heart is breaking, my child. You know I love you dearly. I'll never leave you. She says, what do you mean you can't speak? For the last 20 years, you've been traveling all over and speaking for everybody else, and you can't say a few things about your mother? I spoke about my mother. And one of the things I had to tell about my mother is, you see, this was my mother. When we talked about, and she would want to talk about it, and I didn't want to talk about it. And she would say, look, you know, I'm just sick of being sick. And we would talk about this, and I said, Mother, tell me, are you afraid to die? Of course I'm not afraid to die. The only thing I worry about is what the undertaker will do to me. She was so vain, you know? And she loved diamonds, and she loved to collect all these stones. And I used to say, Mother, don't you read all that? You're not supposed to use those material things like that. You have to get over. She said, look, you know, it's my collection. I like this kind of stuff, this and that. So as we were all gathered around together, and Janie was like a daughter to her, and we were all gathered around her bed, she turns and looks at the abbot, and she says, now listen, I have 3 safety deposit boxes of jewels. She says, and when I go, don't you let those girls go in that box without taking you, because they'll cheat you. And she said, I want you to go in there and get a nice pictorial cross. Pick anything you want. And I'm thinking, well, I hope he doesn't pick this kind I really wanted, you know, and my grandmother ones and everything. So I'm sitting there, and she said, whatever you do, don't let them cheat you now. And he said, well, you know, I really, more than a cross, my family was never able to get me a chalice. So he said, I would like a chalice. She said, well, you pick out any chalice you want, and you pick out any jewels to go in that chalice. And I'm thinking, does she have any clue what those things cost, you know? And it didn't matter to her. So she said, you go in, pick whatever you want. So after my mother goes home, we went down there and we went through the thing, and he had selected some chalice that he had found when he went to he was in Ireland or something, and they found this in the bog, and it was from this and that, and he had it handmade from Spain, and I'm not asking what it costs. Doesn't matter, you know. I promised her. And she told us, if you don't do it, I'll haunt you, you know. So we give him the thing, and he goes down, and luckily he goes, I'm not too crazy about the white stones. I'm going, don't blame you, don't blame you. So he picks out a few stones, and he does this and that, and then it also came with some other gemstones, and they provide those. And he said, I said, well, they said, if you have a preference, you can pick. And he said, no, whatever they would pick. And it's cloisonné. It's very, very beautiful. It's from, like, the medieval time. And, of course, like I said, it was handmade. And finally it comes, And the stones that were all put in there by the people that made it, the silversmiths, was garnets. And garnets was my mother's birthstone. So that was already laid in there. So I was like, you know. And then she said she had one request. On the bottom, as you lift it up, it would say, pray for me. So she makes this beautiful chalice, and we give him this beautiful chalice. And it's used, and it's the dearest thing. And at all feast days, it's brought out, and it's raised up, and it says, pray for me. Now, let me tell you something. This woman was shrewd. She truly used her jewels to get, who said you can't take it with you? So that's what we've done now. And there's 3 or 4 chalices now that have been donated with using her jewels, all pray for me, pray for me. And I think, you know, my mother was very shrewd. And she taught me to be a haggler like that and a dealer like that. And when my mother became very ill, at one point she was placed on a respirator, I learned about a different kind of prayer, and I want to talk to you about that. How many have entered into this kind of prayer? I call it a bargaining prayer. You know, after all this and all the stories I've seen and my eyes have seen and what my ears and all the television shows I've done with Archbishop Hannon, you can fathom it intellectually, but emotionally it was tough to understand this. So I started saying, Lord, I want to do your will, I understand, but if there's some way I can twist your arm a little bit longer. And somehow, you know, I think God started it. Because he said, ask, and you'll receive. Ask anything in my name, and I'll give it to you. So I started asking. Now, the human nature, we are born, do you notice that we're born hagglers? We want a deal. So when we send up our prayer request, we kind of try to sweeten the pot by if. So I started sending a few ifs. If you allow her to last a little longer, I'll give 80% to the church. When she came off the respirator, I was like, maybe 60. You get into this deal where you want a deal, you know? You add this little ifs. Oh, if you don't give me a ticket and you just give me a warning, I'll never speed again in my life, you know? If you let me close this deal, I'll build an orphanage in Africa. Which, by the way, I just got back from doing an orphanage in Africa. Thank you. If you let this tumor be benign, I won't look at any more X-rated websites. If you let my pregnancy test come back negative, I'll never even kiss him again. Somehow we like to haggle. And it's so funny because he lets us haggle. I don't really think he likes us to haggle. But then sometimes I think he looks back and says, okay, well, let me listen to your negotiations. Because in the negotiation process, sometimes it's actually making us a better person. And by the way, that's his job, transforming lives. So he gives us a chance to make some deals. And let me tell you something, he'll cut a deal. Absolutely, Jesus will cut a deal, but it's got to be big. Everything. You got to give everything, then he'll give you everything. But that's the kind of deal he does. You got to give everything. And when he asked you to give everything, that means surrender. Really give it to him. Give up that control in your life. Give up that control in your situation. Give that control up in that thing. And let me tell you something. He's got some amazing payoffs. You think about it. He's going to take care of all our needs. Eternal life. He said he'll deliver us from evil. These are tremendous payoffs if we're willing to turn around and give it up. And that's why I've learned about this bargaining thing. And the other thing I learned going through this thing with my mother was, don't ask why. He's not going to answer it. All through that Bible, I went, man, when you're going through this, I'd go down to that bookstore. You know, they got those bookstores and they got an inspirational thing. I'm reading anything to help me. All he does is answer questions with more questions. Who are you? Who do you say I am? He just throws back questions. I'm like, well, he's not going to answer anyway. And then I started thinking, well, if he did answer it, what difference was it make? He's not going to change it. It's not going to make any difference if I know or I don't know. It reminded me the other day when I was sitting in the dentist office and this little 4-year-old girl, his mother's sitting there pregnant like this, and the little kid's playing with his cars and the Legos, and he comes up and there's a whole room of people, you know. She must have been mortified. And he comes up and he points at his mama's tummy and he goes, Mommy, how'd that baby get in there? How's that baby in your tummy? And everybody turns around and looks at her. She wanted to crawl under the floor, you know. And I looked at that kid and I thought, ooh, that's a real complex question to answer for that 4-year-old. It's a mystery. And even if she explained it to him, he wouldn't get it anyway. And sometimes I think that's how God is with us. If he told us or told us why these things happen, why I had to lose my mother, why I had to lose this, why the marriage is this, why that's that, we wouldn't understand it anyway. I don't know, maybe 1 year after sitting up there talking to him for 1 billion years, we might get it or something. But you know what? I gave up. I'm not asking him no more. It's fruitless. You're not going to tell me anyway, and if you did, I wouldn't understand it. So I started thinking, maybe if I don't ask why, I can ask how. How can I handle this? How can I make this different? How can I come out of this? Show me a way to make this better. Okay, you don't want to tell me why, but tell me how. How are we going to make this better? And it's amazing. He'll answer that. Oh, he'll show you that. The second reason why I don't want to ask why, because I started thinking, what if he flipped the tables and asked me why? I don't want him to ask. Why didn't you listen to me? I didn't hear you. Why didn't you read the signs? I was too tired. Why didn't you do what I told you? I tried my best. I don't want him flipping the questions back to me, so I'm not asking. And you know, when my cousin, the reason why I wasn't here with you last year is that I had a cousin. He's an only child, and I was an only child. He was 1 year younger than I. And so we grew up as brother and sister. Now, Bill, when he was born, I think he had a hole in his heart, so he's a little bit slower. You know, cheese fell off the cracker a little bit for Bill. And, but I loved him because, see, he was my one disciple. No matter what I said, oh, he believed in me, you know? We were going to go do this and some of you that may remember, when one time I told you about a story about I had this Aunt Sade. She was the Catholic in my family. Anybody remember her? You know, this was my Aunt Sade, an old vaudeville singer. You know, she used to sing, love them in the morning, love them every night. And they used to say, Sade, what key do you sing in? And she'd say, whiskey, ha, ha, yeah. But Aunt Sade had this big old car, man, like, you know, remember those cars when they were like metal dashes? And lined up a whole thing, man, was like all these magnet religious figures. She was the Catholic. Man, she had everything. The Holy Family, Mary, St. Jude, St. Anthony. She had Our Lady of Grace, Our Lady of Guadalupe. Man, it stretched the whole thing. But she was a chain smoker. She used to light one cigarette from another cigarette. And all this would be burned up. And all this would burn. And she'd sit in a car. You know those old cars like that, you sat way down, and the steering wheel was real big, and you look between the horn, you know? And so she smoked like that, and I didn't find out till I became a convert that those things were really white, because they were all orange, you know? And then up on that, the sun visor never stayed up. It had the Sacred Heart, League of Jesus, the Motorist's Prayer, St. Christopher before he got bounced out. He was up there pretty big. She'd wrap it all up with a rubber band. She had all that up there. And my Aunt Sade she used to like to toot a few, you know? And when she would get in the car, she used to say, "All right, Jesus, you're going to have to take this wheel. You're going to have to grab this wheel with me, Jesus. Put your hands on this wheel as we drive home together." And Aunt Sade would drive fast. Now, you know your parents, they drive so slow, you know? And then they can never turn the radio up. Oh, that used to drive me crazy, you know? For some reason, parents can't find an address if the radio's on. They're going to turn the radio down. They'd bring me to my friend's house, you know, and I used to say, "They live down there, Daddy, just a minute." And they turned down the radio, you know. But Aunt Sade didn't care. Man, she'd have that up, be singing, you know, "I did it my way." And she'd be singing and singing like that. So Billy and I used to spend all that time with my grandmothers, if you can remember, and we would wait for Aunt Sade to come, and we were forbidden to ever ride in a car with her. So we would wait up late at night to try to get a ride with her. It was better than riding a roller coaster. So she came in one night, and she caught us kids up giggling. She didn't have any kids. She was kind of cranky with kids, but if we weren't going to tell on her, she put up with us, you know. So she said, "You kids want to take a ride over to Uncle Ed's cottage?" Yeah, this was the big chance. Oh, my God, this was Pee-wee's big adventure. So we get in the car with Aunt Sade into this old Ford with this metal dash, and all the litany and saints and everything are up there. And we get in the car, and she cranks it up, and she had a few. And this is in Pennsylvania. It's a rural area, and you're going up and down over these hills, you know, those narrow roads. And so she'd go, and then you'd hit a bump, boom, and then your head would fly up, and there's no padding, and you'd hit that steel thing, boom. Oh, my God, and we loved it. Man, we never did anything like this with our parents. And then Aunt Sade would look over, and she'd start laughing, you know. You like that? She started choking, and the tears be running from her eyes. Now she's not looking at the wheel. She's not looking out the window. She's like, and the gas is down. And now Billy and I are real scared, you know. And we're looking over. Man, she's red. She's purple. The cigarette's still flying. She won't take it out of her mouth. Finally, we pull up at my Uncle Ed's. We get out of the car, and that's where Billy and I first learned to pray. Now, this is my cousin. That's his first exposure to Catholicism. Later on in life, there was different members in my family. They became Catholic. Some of them became Lutheran. And there's a great couple stories that they may have back there about the first time I attended a Catholic church. But I want you to know that this was Billy's first exposure to Catholicism. Then he hears about me, and we had a pact. You see, we thought we could get married. We're little kids. And then they sat us down and said, you can't get married, you're cousins. So he said, okay, well, we'll just stay friends, and you won't get married, and I won't get married, and every year we'll hang around together, and we'll still travel and do things together. We did. Every year we made a pact. Even when I was away at college, he would come and visit me, or he was away, and we never spent one summer away from each other. And we had this tremendous bond. And then Billy had a heart valve problem. And when he got sick, as God should have it, he sent him here to me, and I was able to take care of him. And I get a call, and they said, he used to talk like this, you know, that Pennsylvania accent. Hey, Char, I don't know what's wrong. My stomach's all swole out. I look like I'm pregnant, and they're telling me I need a gallbladder operation. I said, well, you're not getting no gallbladder operation. I said, you've got to come down to New Orleans. You know, he's in a small town. And he said, well, I don't know. So his friend calls me and said, he's in no condition to travel. He can't do this. They had him scheduled for a gallbladder operation. I sent another cousin that was closer up there, and he said, look, this guy can't make it through a gallbladder operation. Through the grace of God, the anesthesiologist goes in there and says, Mr. Symington, I cannot in good conscience operate on you for this. So I hurried up and took a plane, flew up there. He was too ill. The planes wouldn't even take him down. I got my other cousin to drive him down. Long story short. So I take him, I fly back and go immediately into ICU with him, which is why I wasn't here. Because now I've taken him to ICU. They tell me his only hope now is a heart transplant, but he's only 50-some years old, so they're going to move him up pretty good, but he's so far gone full of this fluid because they had left him along, not treating him for the fluid, but for gallbladder. So I get him, and then it actually ended up we had to have him airlifted to Ochsner for a specialist, and I never left his side. I slept at the hospital, I bathed at the hospital, I never left his side. And one of the first things we did when we got there, I said to Bill, and Bill knew that I spoke at conferences, and he would come with me sometimes to Mass, and then sometimes, you know, he would say, well, drop me off at the Presbyterian church. He told me, he said, I'm a deacon. I said, oh, a deacon? You a deacon in a Presbyterian church? Wow. I said, what does a deacon do? I said, that's a long process in a Catholic church. He said, I got to make the coffee and deliver the flowers. So I said, well, look, Bill, so we're good friends with the abbot, and the abbot comes and sees him, and he's immediately in ICU. And the abbot says, he takes me out, and he said, you know, if he wanted to, and just express the desire to become Catholic, he could become Catholic. I can take care of that. And he said, well, you know, it's kind of a delicate thing. He's in ICU, he's hooked up to a lot of machines, and I got to go in there and say something to him. So I said, Bill, listen, I just want to tell you something. And we had a situation before where we had prayed for him. It's a whole other story, but where we had placed the Teresa Newman relic over him, and he made it through a heart valve surgery. So he was leaning and believed in that, but just didn't have his own courage to approach it. So I said, Bill, listen, I just talked to Abbot Justin, and he said if you wanted to become Catholic, he can take care of it. And he looks at me and he said, you know, Char, I think I'd like that. He said, imagine that, Roman Catholicism. That sounded pretty heady for him, you know? So the abbot did. He went over, he saw the local, our parish priest. He made all the arrangements. The following morning, Billy received communion for the first time. He received it for 3 days. On the third day, he had to have a tube in him. And then we began the vigil. We were saying Divine Mercy. We said all those prayers for the dying. We gave him a rosary. He had scapulas. He had scapulas. He had every pin pinned on him. And he gripped that rosary in his hand. And it was the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. And this when we transported him, and then he was hooked up to tubes, and he desperately needed a heart transplant, and we gave it everything until it just wasn't going to happen, and so we had to make the decision. And he gripped that rosary, and he looked at me, and he was conscious, and he held that rosary, and when he passed, he had that rosary, and we were able to whisper those prayers in his ears. We were able to do divine mercy. And do you know why? Because all of you people prayed. I wasn't here, but you made that happen. It's like John said, bring one soul. We did it. And that's why I'm going to tell you something. These people at the Arizona conference, you people here, you're ready. You are ready. God will find you ready. You have treated, when you can walk the talk, you walk the talk. And I personally thank you, and I thank you for Bill. But now you can understand that it was much more important for me to be at his side and to help him cross over like that. And it was a beautiful, beautiful, it was a lovely thing. It was a tremendous thing. And as I look back at the people were like, I didn't know he was Catholic. And then Janie called the priest, and the priest said, that's the most beautiful story I ever heard. Can I tell the story? And you know what? A lot of his friends were Catholic, but nobody had asked him to join the church. They just didn't know. There I am again on my thing. Ask somebody to join. Go out there, reach out to them, bring them home. The water's fine. They love to come in, and it's easy for them, you know, when you're already Catholic and you left, you know, one big thing. They're not going to put us through the hoops that we had to go through to get in here. But the other thing is I want to tell you is all these wonderful things, if it hadn't been for Katrina and all of these things, don't you see, accidental. I happen to be there as an accidental apostle. We're all here as an accidental apostle. And through all of this, when I look back and I see all of the things that happened, it reminds me that when I went to Medjugorje, and you remember how I was with the rosary being a convert, you know, with that rosary, and learning about the rosary. And then I look back and I see all these people, and I listen to the testimonies, and I hear, and you know what really hits me? You know, Medjugorje is the greenhouse of faith. This is where the faith gets nurtured. You kind of, like, you've been in a greenhouse where they protect you, they got shade cloths, they water the plants, they nourish it, they feed it, and then you feel strong enough and you go out into the world and you plant it and you got to bloom where you're planted. It's a wonderful thing that Medjugorje is the greenhouse of faith. And I started thinking about how the joyful mysteries, you know, don't you really think that Medjugorje revived the rosary? I really do think that, you know, because I remember being over there with these other cradle Catholics, and they were like, well, yeah, I had a rosary, but I don't remember the mysteries. So they were getting out papers, and then they were teaching me the mysteries, you know. And it's very interesting about these mysteries, but please try to get a hold of this from a Protestant or for somebody who's away from the church or doesn't even know. That, now, I want you to do this, and I've said this before, but I want you to follow this. This is what you call the joyful mysteries. Okay? Let's start. The angel appears to Mary and tells, the first, the Annunciation. Angel appears to Mary, tells her that you are going to have a child. And she said, well, wait a minute. I don't know, man. No worry. Now, this is in a time when she's going to get killed for this. She can get stoned for this. This is unheard of. This is a joyful mystery. Think of it from me. I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right. This don't sound so joyful to me. It sounds like this is pretty stressful, but okay, let's go. Then the next mystery is, now she's going to go on the visitation to visit Elizabeth. Okay. I've been to the Holy Land. That's a long way. They don't have many cars or SUVs. She's going on a donkey. And she's going to ride that donkey up to her cousin, who's what, 80 years old? And she's going to have a baby? This is a joyful mystery. Please think of me trying to figure this out. All right? The next thing is the nativity. They got to get up at night. They got to go. There's no place to stay. Not even a barn. And they get thrown out here. No, we don't have nothing here. They don't have anything there. Poor Joseph is going. He finds this. And finally, they got to put her in a manger with the cows and all that around in there. And she's laying in there. This is joyful. This is a joyful mystery. I'm like, this is pretty stressful on me. Okay. Here comes the presentation. Must be going to get better here. She's going to go to the temple, bring it to the Father. It's got to get better. Simeon walks up. He takes a look at the baby. He said, boy, this child's destined to be the downfall of many. And a sword is going to pierce your heart. That don't sound real joyful to me. Okay. Here comes my favorite. Jesus is lost. Have you ever lost your purse? Have you ever lost your wallet? A credit card? Do you know the fear that seizes your heart? Oh my God, my credit cards, my wallet. Can you imagine Mary lost the Savior? She loses the Savior. This is the fifth joyful mystery. I didn't learn till later on there was fruits. It's supposed to bring you out of this. But I know I did turn to Janie and I said, if these are the joyful mysteries, glory be to God, give me a while till I learn the sorrowful. You know, there's a story that says, there's a book that says, everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. I'm going to tell you something. Everything I needed to learn, I learned from Catholicism. I love it. We got saints for everything, you know, got bad eyes. We got department heads. Go to St. Lucie, you know, need to sell your house, go see St. Joe. You know, you lose something, St. Anthony, got bad eyes, St. Lucie. And we got department heads. St. Anne, find me a man. But the one thing that thrilled me beyond anything, and I want to tell you, this is some stuff you learned from Katrina. Well, let me tell you something. The thing I loved when I heard about a scapula, I looked at this, and it said, whoever wears this will not suffer the pains of hell, the fires of hell. I couldn't get that thing on fast enough. I said, why aren't they telling everybody about this? So I was working at an advertising agency one time, and man, as soon as I got that scapula, I had that thing on. Man, I wasn't taking that off. Man, I would get it, and it would get all messed up and get, dust and powder on it and everything, but man, I'd wear it. And I was putting together this real big presentation one time in front of these highbrow people and some CEOs and different people, and I was rushing around getting their papers, and I was at this advertising agency as creative director, and they were trying to really put on a dog to this client, and I'm rushing around doing that, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but somehow my scapula it worked its way up here. But I'm so busy, I don't pay attention. And the other people are looking, and I guess it must have looked like I had a trach patch or something. I don't know. So, but you know, it's like having something on your face nobody wants to tell you. So finally, the head guy that we're trying to entertain, not entertain, but present to, he can't stand it anymore. And he says, you have something right there. So I said, oh. Everybody at the table went. The guy I work for, he only wanted to go under the table. And finally, that guy, there's dead silence. And the head guy who said I had it, he said, what was that? And I said, fire insurance. You know, that's something y'all got away from, wearing those scapulas. If you've been through Katrina, what I've been through Katrina, you know, in the famous words of Ray Charles, I love Ray Charles. Ray Charles said, live every day like it's your last, because one day it's gonna be. Get yourself a scapula. Let me tell you what, I love the scapula. I've been telling that story. You know what happened from that scapula? That guy rode with me, and his whole family came back to the church. He said, you know, I used to be Catholic. I said, no such thing. One good confession, you're back in. You don't have to go through the hoops I went through. I said, man, they named that thing the CIA. It's like our CIA. It's like the CIA to get in. One good confession, you're in. And he went back to it, all because of fire insurance. Accidental apostle. Accidental. I got to tell you something. You know, I've been telling this story, and I love the scapula, and I want everybody to get them. I love them. It's an outward appearance, because people will say, what is it? And then plus, when you go through security, they don't ring. So I went into Catholic Charities, and they always have, I love those thrift stores, you know. And there was a thrift store basket up there, and it has like old prayer books and everything, so I was going through it. And one day I went in there, and take a look at this scapula I found. Oh my, I hit bingo. It's got blue, brown, black, red. I have a full coverage. It's got the St. Benedict medal on it. I don't know where you get these, but they've got these out in the bookstore. Don't leave without your scapula. And then we'll look into these. I don't even know what it means, but to me, it looked like it was a full coverage package. I said, I want that. I've been Katrina. I want every kind of insurance I can get. See, Katrina will teach you, plan ahead, like Noah. Wasn't raining when he made the ark. Plan ahead. Keep cash. That's true. Keep cash. Man, you can't get anything. When those lights went down, when everything was down, there's no ATMs. You can't. There's no money. You can't gas. Keep your car gassed up. These are true things that we have been through, and you have to learn. Stay fit. You never know when you're 600 years old, somebody's going to ask you to do something big, like build an ark. And remember, that ark, that was built by amateurs. The Titanic, professionals. But no matter what the hurricane, no matter what the storm, as long as God's in the boat, there's a rainbow. Amen? When I asked Janie to call the mirror group here for the name of my talk, it just came to me, accidental apostle, and I said, because we're all accidental apostles. Do you ever see the beat of this? I mean, no one is ever like they seem. You know, the media, I work in media, so the media like tells you, yeah, you know, we know what Miss America should look like, you know what a CEO should look like, you know what a leader should look like, but you really don't know. Never judge somebody from their outward appearance. And the proof of that is, look at Jesus. You know, he wasn't exactly what they had in mind for a leader, much less a Messiah. He wasn't a warrior. He didn't come from royalty. He not only came from the wrong side of town, he came from the wrong town. He's a God of surprises. And you know what? Surprise. Look how he picked, just like Father Pharisee was saying. He picked the broken, the forsaken, to go out and do his mission. That's what he has here with all of us. We are the accidental apostles that he is using to carry on this mission. God love you. Thank you very much. God love you. Thank you. Thank you.